Entry is luck. Size is truth. Build a system. Journal the damage. Own your time. You think the market pays you for being cute with an entry. I hear that fantasy all the time. Pick a clean spot. Click with a steady hand. And suddenly the account feels charmed. No worries. Right? Until the same finger gets wrecked on a pump and dump and starts blaming everything but the mirror. I am not here to polish that belief. I am here to knife it open. Your own line says it out loud. Entry is a form of luck. Finally, a little honesty. And that is exactly where the trouble starts. Because the moment you label it luck, you quietly surrender the parts that decide whether you bleed or bank. Calling entry luck works like anesthesia. It numbs accountability. It also sneaks in a lazy narrative. A so-called good fill brings money. A bad fill steals capital, time, and effort. Cute, simple, wrong. Price moved your way, so the entry was good. Price kicked you, so the entry was bad. That is not analysis. That is a bedtime story for anxious traders. Reality is meaner. Entry without sizing is a lottery ticket wearing lipstick. Entry without context is a selfie at a cliff edge. Entry without attention is how accounts get shredded while the trader swears the setup was clean. You can chant focus and persistence until your throat burns. If the size is clown shoes or the context is ignored, the market will make you pay tuition in full. Your draft leans on extreme focus and stubborn persistence during selection. Sounds noble until it mutates into tunnel vision. Focus that never checks exposure becomes cosplay. Discipline looks strict. Trade sloppy. Persistence that treats every candle like a personal insult is just revenge in a suit. You are not fooling the market. You are dragging your own corpse across the chart and calling it progress. The screen does not care how hard you stare at it. It responds to what is actually on the line and how that risk reacts when volatility slaps back. Attention that never measures size is just anxiety, doing push-ups. Then you toss in the most useful line. Almost like an afterthought, choose a volume that fits you. Finally, something with teeth. And yet, you whisper it, when it should be shouted. Size is not an accessory. Size is the truth, serum. A flashy entry with oversized volume is a grenade with the pin already out. A mediocre entry with sane volume can breathe through the chop and still pay. Traders brag about entries because it sounds clever at the bar. Accounts are built or buried by position size and risk tolerance that do not flinch when the candle wicks like a switchblade. Size tells the truth about what you actually believe, not what you post. Another point hides under the carpet, the requirement to actually choose. Choice is expensive. Every click kills the chance to click elsewhere. Later. Better. Slapping the word luck on entry becomes a shrug that excuses that cost. That shrug hides untested criteria, skipped context, and emotional drift. People repeat the same mistakes and call it experience. Experience without extraction is just aging inside a platform. If entry is luck, then the lever that still belongs to you is how much you stake, how long you tolerate noise, and how you respond when the tape stops flattering your story. That is where most traders go quiet, because it is easier to hypnotize yourself with the romance of precision than to live with the math of exposure. You also claim a good entry brings money. That bait builds a perfect trap. Eyes start worshiping precision over process. Miss the spot by a whisker and panic floods the bloodstream. Hit it once or twice and overconfidence blooms like mold. That is how hesitation and FOMO take turns driving the wheel. The loop continues because the model is wrong. Money flows from repeatable edges executed with sizing that respects risk and attention that refuses to chase. Without that backbone, your focus is just a tense jaw before a bad decision. and your persistence is just stubbornness, cosplaying as grit. The market is not grading your neat circle on the chart. It is grading whether your sequence survives randomness. So, yes, entry contains luck, and pretending otherwise is childish. But luck is not a paycheck. The market does not wire money for clever clicks. It pays sequences that can take a punch without vomiting equity. Your paragraphs want to believe that concentration and stamina at the moment of selection are enough. I respect stamina. Without structure, it is sand in the gears. And that leads to the part you tiptoe around but cannot dodge. If entry is luck and size is truth, what actually carries you across a series when the coin toss stops flattering you? If entry is luck and size is truth, what carries you across a series when the coin toss stops flattering you? Your own draft points at it, a concrete trading system. Not a vibe, not a collage of indicators. Not a pep talk about focus and persistence, an actual playbook that makes your behavior predictable under pressure. The words look clean, but the blind spot is filthy. A so-called system that is not explicit about where you act, where you are wrong, how much you are willing to bleed. And when you stand down is not a system. It is a costume stitched to impress your future self after you get wrecked. Dressing fear in rules is not the same as building rules that survive fear. You say to build a specific system before starting the job. Good line. Now push where it hurts. Specificity costs comfort. The second rules are real. Disobedience becomes obvious. That is why plans stay fuzzy, so the trader can wiggle out after a faceplant and mumble that the script always allowed for exceptions. A real system corners you. It exposes whether that proud focus is just tunnel vision and whether that loud persistence is just revenge with a calendar. It forces math to speak louder than nerves. If the supposed strategy cannot state in one sentence what defines action, what defines invalidation, and what defines risk per attempt, it is not a strategy. It is a bedtime story told to calm a shaking hand. Your text keeps leaning on attention and stamina as if those two alone carry the weight. The market does not pay for how hard you stare or how long you hold your breath. It pays sequences that survive randomness. When a system is real, size couples to it like a spine. Entry is the door. Size is the floor. And rules keep you from falling through. Without that spine, you are an actor reading confident lines while the account leaks in silence. The leak accelerates the moment you start worshiping precision. Hit a beautiful fill once and ego balloons. Miss by a tick and panic spills everywhere. Precision worship is just FOMO dressed in a tie. The playbook is supposed to kill that drama by making the sequence dull and repeatable. If the sequence is not dull, it is not repeatable. If it is not repeatable, it is not real. Then, you drop the claim that longer time frames deliver more profit and stability than scalp-style lunges. The sentence flatters patience and sounds mature, but the trap is in the word more. Longer frames cut noise. Sure. And they also stretch time. Gains accrue slower. Drawdowns last longer. Feedback arrives late. And boredom breeds side quests your rules never authorized. Wider stops can absorb chaos, but they also carry heavier emotion when a wick slices deep and hangs there like a threat. The equity line can look smoother exactly until the slow bleed turns into a winter you did not price in. On the flip side, frantic clicking can feel alive while compounding micro mistakes into a crater. Neither path is holy. The edge does not live in the calendar. It lives in the alignment between your system's rhythm and your psychology's tolerance. If the rhythm does not fit, the size will betray you. You will undersize safe setups and oversize boredom trades, then swear the market is unfair while your own rules sit there, half-written and totally ignored. Buried in your draft is the line with teeth. Choose a volume that suits you. That sentence, if honored, humiliates a lot of nonsense. A playbook without volume logic is a diary of mood swings. A playbook with volume logic but no clarity on invalidation is a guilt machine that cuts late and prays earlier every week. A playbook with both but no evidence trail is performance theater. You can chant about systems all day. The account only listens to exposure. If the exposure cannot survive a string of losses you can realistically encounter, the so-called system is just a costume change between phases of the same meltdown. So, yes, build a system. But here is the question your text tiptoes around. Where is the proof that it exists outside your head? A real system leaves footprints. Definitions before exposure. Reactions before opinions. Numbers before narratives. Without those footprints, the longer time frame line is just a lullaby, whispered to the equity curve, while hoping pain evaporates overnight. The market will ask for receipts. Where are yours? And what do they say when the candle whips? The focus fades. And the tidy theory meets slippage that cuts like a razor, because if you cannot show the receipts, what makes the next claim about your process anything more than another pretty sentence? Receipts? That lands squarely on your journaling line. You tossed it in like a side dish record discipline breaks. Track moments when the market did not follow the system. Log fundamental events and watch the reaction. Sounds diligent. Looks clean. Under a microscope it falls apart. A journal that does not corner behavior is a scrapbook. A journal that does not quantify damage is confession without penance. Traders love writing paragraphs after getting wrecked. It feels productive. It reads wise. And it changes nothing. Blood, sweat, and tears end up on the page while the next candle repeats the same crime. Record discipline breaks and do not repeat them. That sentence pretends clarity while hiding the trap door. Discipline only exists where boundaries are explicit. If the entry criteria can stretch, if the stop logic is a vibe, if the size flexes with mood, then what exactly broke? Without a pre-declared rule set, a violation is just regret with a timestamp. You call it a break after the loss because it hurts, not because it crossed a line defined in advance. That is how the mind launders FOMO. The journal becomes a courtroom where you play both judge and defendant, and the verdict conveniently arrives after the trade pukes. No worries, right? New day. New resolve until the same drama returns with a different ticker. Then comes the slicker line. Stat the times the market did not behave like the system. Read that again. The phrasing smuggles a victim narrative into the notebook. The market misbehaved. Your system stayed pure. Cute. Except price is the reference, and your model is the guess. Calling it misbehavior means the model owns truth and price owes compliance. That is how fragile strategies survive on paper while equity bleeds in silence. If the outcome distribution keeps kicking you outside, expectation, the system is not being betrayed. It is being profiled. Either the regime shifted and your filter is blind, or your sample size was fantasy and variance, just showed up with brass knuckles. Writing market did not follow the system is a lullaby for ego. The proper question is uglier. The system failed its environment. What in its definition allowed that failure to propagate? You also propose logging fundamental events and observing price reaction. Reasonable ambition. Terrible execution if the journal does it backwards. Post-event narratives read like prophecy because the tape already printed. The mind stitches after the fact logic, calls it reaction, and pretends it was causal insight. Without a pre-event hypothesis, a reaction window, and a baseline for expected volatility, the notes are trivia dressed as research. The feed said something, the candle moved, and your brain glued them together. That glue is how bias builds a shrine in your notebook. Worse, nothing in your draft forces a difference between headline, shock, and liquidity, vacuum, between scheduled releases and tape bombs. One gets absorbed, The other disorders, the order book. Your journal treats them like siblings when they are not even cousins. The blind spot gets wider. Nowhere do you corner the "do not repeat" line with enforcement. Where is the exposure throttle after a sequence of hits? Where is the pause after a certain number of scratches? Where is the de-escalation when spreads blow out? And where is the shutoff when slippage starts carving chunks from fills? The journal, as written, is a mirror that flatters. No risk of ruin estimate. No expectancy tracked per setup family. No base rates by session, by volatility regime, by news state. Without those receipts, the notebook is performance art. You will read it, nod like a sage, and then size the boredom trade twice as large because the day owes you a winner. You mention persistence like it is a virtue the pages will summon. Persistence without feedback loops is just stubbornness with prettier handwriting. The harsh reality: people record outcomes, not decisions. They log profit and loss and skip the distribution of mistakes. They track the win, ignore the drift. They write about emotions with prose and never tag triggers with counts. The market will keep asking the only questions that matter. How many losses in a row can this structure survive? What does a normal drawdown look like for this edge? And which conditions statistically flip it from pressure to prey? Your draft leaves those answers blank, then pleads for focus. Focus on what another tidy paragraph explaining why the last candle was rude, and that last line, "do not repeat them," hides the cruelest loop. Without friction points built into the routine, repetition is inevitable. The hand will chase. The mind will justify. The journal will lament. Rinse. Repeat. The page becomes a trophy case of insights that never cross into behavior. That is how traders accumulate wisdom and keep losing the same way, year after year, while the notebook grows thick and the account stays thin. So, here is the bitter pivot your text is begging for. If the journal does not corner behavior, quantify damage, and expose regime mismatch in real time. What separates disciplined reflection from beautifully written denial? Because if the notes cannot force change, what exactly do you think happens when naive comfort collides with the harsh reality of risk? Naive comfort versus harsh reality? Your text sets both on the same page and acts like they are friends. They are not. The naive side says entry is partly luck, and then quietly treats that as permission to keep chasing pretty fills. Reality says luck is noise, and exposure is the amplifier that either turns noise into ruin or into a manageable sting. The naive side worships focus and persistence. Reality yawns and asks whether the sequence is dull enough to be repeatable when your hands shake. The naive side sprinkles a journal with tidy reflections. Reality wants receipts that cut through denial, not paragraphs that cuddle it. You wrote the ingredients for survival, then arrange them like decor. Take that line about a longer time frame, offering higher profit and stability than scalping. It reads like wisdom because the words sound calm. Reality is messier. A slow chart compresses the number of decisions and stretches the duration of uncertainty. That can soothe nerves until a wide stop holds pain for days and the mind invents reasons to interfere. A fast chart explodes the number of clicks and lures boredom into overtrading. Both environments punish fantasies. The naive frame tries to rank them as safe versus reckless. The real frame asks whether your system's rhythm, your size logic, and your tolerance for drawdown actually line up. If they do not, the time frame becomes a trap dressed as a choice. You wrote the preference as if the calendar fixes discipline. It does not. The calendar only exposes it. Now, contrast your journaling bullets with what the market actually audits. You propose logging discipline breaks, market misbehavior, and fundamental reactions. On paper, that looks diligent. In reality, the only discipline break that matters is the one defined before the trade with a line you cannot wiggle. The only misbehavior worth writing down is the one your own model performed, when the outcome distribution made a mockery of its promises. The only fundamental reaction worth a note is the one you framed in advance with a window, an expected range, and a decision effect. Naive journaling records emotions like poetry and calls it progress. Real journaling pins behavior to numbers and forces exposure to answer for pain. You aimed for reflection. The market requires prosecution. Your volume sentence exposes another split. Naive comfort hears, choose a size that suits you, and translates it to, feels comfortable today. Harsh reality hears, choose a size that survives a sequence of losses consistent with your edge and your volatility regime. One keeps you warm. The other keeps you funded. The difference is not small. It is the distance between living to trade and getting wrecked after a week of coin flips you swore would reverse any minute. You hinted at the truth and then tiptoed past it as if the line were impolite. The market is not polite. It is a stress test with a price. Even your focus and persistence mantra wears this split. Naive focus clings to a chart until hope drowns doubt. Naive persistence keeps clicking because quitting would bruise the story you tell about grit. Reality wants a protocol that reduces discretion when you are tilted. Reality wants a throttle that lowers size after a certain number of scratches. A pause when spreads widen beyond your baseline. A shutoff when slippage eats a chunk of the expected edge. None of that is inspirational. All of that is survival. Your draft praises the stare. Reality audits the structure that keeps the stare from turning into delusion. Then there is the soft landing at the end of your text. Use your time for what you like. Convert freedom into financial freedom. Chase, meaning not status. Live calmly. The intention is good. The execution is risky. Naive comfort makes freedom a mood. Harsh reality makes freedom a schedule. Markets are calendars with consequences. If the trading routine does not lock in guardrails that protect time from your worst impulses, then the promise of calm becomes another mask for avoidance. Meaning cannot shield capital from sloppy exposure, and calm cannot stitch a cut made by denial. You aimed at life advice. The ledger keeps asking for operating principles that make that advice possible when the screen blinks red. So, put the contrasts on the table and stop pretending they are cosmetic. Luck versus exposure. Focus versus protocol. Journaling theater versus behavioral enforcement. Timeframe dogma versus fit. Freedom is sentiment versus freedom is structure. Your own draft wrote both halves and then refused to pick a side. That refusal is how equity drips away while you tell yourself the plan is almost there. The plan is either hard enough to trap your worst habits, or it is soft enough to collapse on contact. You already know which one you have, because the mirror does not lie when drawdown stretches, and the journal keeps handing out eloquent alibis. If you are done giving yourself alibis, what does an escape route look like that uses your own lines as the spine instead of decoration? An escape route does not live in pep talk. It lives in how your own lines get translated into mechanisms that outstubborn your worst impulses. Start where you began. Entry is luck. Fine. Treat luck like weather uncontrollable. Predictable only in ranges. That makes the only honest lever the exposure that surrounds it. A so-called good fill means nothing if the size turns turbulence into catastrophe. A so-called bad fill is recoverable if the size turns turbulence into a nuisance. The text hints at that with, choose a volume that suits you. Read that as size bands, not vibes. Bands tied to volatility, so that when the tape breathes heavier, the band tightens automatically. And when it calms, the band allows a little more oxygen without pretending you found a holy grail. No heroics. Just a throttle that answers to the tape instead of your mood. Focus and persistence appear again. They sound disciplined. They often hide denial. Translate focus into pre-declared triggers and aborts. So attention cannot keep stretching rules to protect an ego. translate persistence into a shut-off path. So, grit does not morph into tilt with a cape on. The line about extreme concentration at selection becomes cleaner once selection is not a stare, but a checklist that either fires or does not. If the list fires, the size band assigns exposure. If it does not, the click is already vetoed. That way, when the coin toss stops flattering you, the routine does not suddenly get poetic about conviction. It gets smaller, slower, duller. Dull is not sexy. Dull is how accounts stop bleeding. Your draft says build a specific system before you start. Let the system earn that word. One sentence that defines action. One sentence that defines wrong. One sentence that defines risk per try. Then a protocol for what happens after a certain number of scratches, after a certain number of full stops, and after slippage exceeds a threshold that used to be rare, but today is not. Tie the protocol to receipts, not feelings. If variance is ripping, the band tightens on its own. If conditions revert, the band widens on its own. You called for persistence. Here it wears a seatbelt. The time frame message can keep its dignity without pretending superiority. Slow charts and fast charts are different diets for the same metabolism. Fit beats dogma. Take your line about longer horizons, delivering profit and stability, and make it conditional. Stability only exists if your psychology tolerates waiting while the account floats deeper water. If boredom starts inventing side quests, slow becomes dangerous. If pace spikes your heart rate and makes fingers twitchy, fast becomes gasoline. Either way, the system you claim to have decides the tempo, not a mood or a meme. The calendar is not a virtue signal. It is a metronome. If the metronome does not match your breath, the song turns into noise and the equity into a leak. Now, smash your journaling bullets into something that prosecutes behavior instead of admiring it. Discipline breaks become pre-tagged violations, not post-trade poetry. Market did not follow. The system becomes regime mismatch tagged with time, volatility state, and spread conditions, not a grievance letter. Fundamental events become pre-written hypotheses with a reaction window and a decision effect, not a retroactive story that flatters hindsight. The same notebook that once collected blood, sweat, and tears now collects base rates per setup family. Expectancy drift across sessions, and the sequence length you can realistically survive before size bands throttle you down. The text already wanted receipts. This is how they stop being decorations. Your last paragraph about time and freedom wants to land softly. Use your time for what you like. Convert freedom into financial freedom. Chase, meaning over status. Live calmly. Keep it and harden it. Freedom that stays a sentiment becomes an alibi for avoidance. Freedom that becomes a schedule turns into margin for life that the market did not get to rent. The same way size bands defend capital, time bands defend attention. Windows for scan, windows for execute, windows for review, and windows where the platform is closed because meaning exists outside the chart. Not romantic, just operational. The text asks for an Ananian life. That calm does not appear by wishing at candles. It appears when risk has a leash, behavior has friction, and the screen does not get to interrupt dinner because boredom dressed up as opportunity again. So the escape route is not a new gospel. It is your own sentences upgraded into enforcement. Entry is weather. Size is the umbrella. Rules are the ribs. Journaling is the receipt book. Timeframe is the tempo. Freedom is the schedule. When those pieces click, luck becomes background noise. And meaning stops being a slogan, it becomes leftover attention the market could not steal. If that is what the text truly wanted all along, then the next cut is obvious and uncomfortable when the structure is in place and the noise still screams. Where does the edge actually come from, and how do you keep it sharp when calm living and violent screens keep trying to tear it dull? Where does the edge come from when calm living and a violent screen keep trying to file it down? From the same sentences you wrote, but forged instead of framed. Entry is a kind of luck, so treat it like weather. You do not negotiate with weather. You outfit for it. Choose a volume that fits you, turns into a size band that breathes with volatility, not with mood swings. Build a specific system collapses into one line for action, one line for wrong, and one line for risk per attempt. Keep a journal upgrades into keep receipts that corner behavior instead of cuddling it. And your soft landing about time and meaning stops being a slogan and becomes a schedule that the platform is not allowed to invade. Edge lives in the overlap of those steels, not in any single blade. Entry luck gets neutered when size refuses to turn randomness into catastrophe. Size gets honest only when the system defines the leash before the dog runs. The system stops being theater when the journal tracks base rates, tags, regimes, measures, exposure, drift, and then actually throttles you when those numbers scream. Timeframe stops being a sermon when your pace matches your nervous system instead of auditioning for approval. Freedom stops being a mood when the platform closes on time, not when boredom says it is safe. None of that is inspirational. All of it is survival. Your softest lines carry the hardest consequences. Focus and persistence sound heroic, untethered. They are liabilities. Translate focus into a gate that either fires a trade or shuts it down. No romantic middle where hope edits rules on the fly. Translate persistence into a path that automatically descales after a run of scratches, pauses when spreads go feral, and stands down when slippage eats edge. You ask for concentration at selection. Let a checklist do the staring so your eyes do not have to pretend. You asked for stamina. Let the throttle do the humbling so your ego does not have to improvise. That is how the same words stop flattering and start protecting. That longer time frame sentence keeps whispering about stability. Here is the knife. Stability is earned only when waiting does not provoke sabotage. If waiting breeds side quests, slow becomes a trap that calls itself maturity. If speed spikes your pulse, fast becomes a trap that calls itself hustle. Fit is the only measure that survives variance. The calendar is a metronome. Your breath either matches it or every bar turns into a dare. Pretend otherwise and equity leaks while you congratulate patience that never existed. Your draft wanted a verdict between slow and fast. Reality wants a truce between tempo and temperament, signed in position size, not signed in wishful thinking. Your journaling bullets want credit for wisdom. They get credit when they corner behavior. Record discipline breaks only if the line existed before the click. Track so-called market misbehavior only if the tag is regime mismatch that forces a response. Note fundamentals only if a hypothesis was on paper before the headline, with a reaction window and a decision effect. Then attach teeth, shrink after a string of scratches, pause after abnormal slippage, stand down when spreads break the frame. Receipts without enforcement are bedtime stories. Enforcement without receipts is theater. You wrote the right nouns. They just needed verbs that bite. Now tie it back to freedom and meaning. The market will rent every minute you do not protect. A schedule is how you charge it interest. Windows for scan, for execute, and for review. Windows where the platform stays closed because life exists off-screen. Meaning is not a scented candle. It is the leftover attention the screen failed to steal. Calm is not a mood. It is the noise budget defended by rules that trigger even when you would rather look brave than stay solvent. Your last paragraph aimed at an easy piece. The only piece that lasts is the one your process can afford on a bloody day. So the edge is not mystical and not imported. It is your own paragraphs, weaponized. Entry as weather. Size as truth. System as spine. Journal as court. Timeframe as tempo. Freedom as calendar. When those pieces click, resilience stops being a poster and becomes the way you bleed smaller and recover cleaner. Losses still land, but they do not become sagas. Wins still arrive, but they do not trick you into costume genius. The account stops telling bedtime stories and starts speaking in base rates, drawdown tolerances, and sequences your nerves can actually carry. The screen will keep asking the same cold question: do your words have teeth? Or are they just decals on a cracked windshield? If this hit home, share it with your crew. Subscribe to Flow State Trading if you want more breakdowns that slice through fluff and put teeth on process. When the next candle tries to sell you a fairy tale, replay this and let the structure answer first. The market will keep testing. Let your receipts do the talking.